Hi, I'm Dan Robinson with the Great Lakes Spirituality Project. The project works to further develop a spirituality of the lakes that values and protects the Great Lakes Basin and all life that depends on these waters. To accomplish that mission, the project shares stories, conversations, and reflections around the spirituality of the Great Lakes Basin, adds another spiritual voice to the work of protecting the lakes, and serves as a connecting point for spiritual and religious communities and individuals caring for the lakes and the waters that feed them. Also, I want to welcome Brenna Cussen-Anglada, who is a Catholic worker farmer in southwest Wisconsin, the home of the Ho-Chunk and Meskwaki. She is a founding member of the St. Isidore Farm and lives with her spouse, a family of 4, and various other visitors, guests, and interns. Brenna recently directed the Loras College Peace Institute for high school age students. And so welcome, Brenna. Again, thank you for being here. And I also want to welcome Michele Naar-Obed, who is a part of the Hildegard House Catholic worker community. She also works with the Christian Peacemaking Team, a human rights and violence reduction organization. In particular, she worked with the team based in Iraqi Kurdistan from 2006 to 2012. And she now lives with her family in Duluth, Minnesota at the Hildegard House. So welcome, Michele. Thank you for being here. Michele and Brenna are also half of the group known as the 4 Necessity Valve Turners, along with Allison Pullman and Daniel Yildirim. Together on February 4th, 2019, they attempted to shut off the flow of tar sands oil through Minnesota and the treaty territory of several Ojibwe nations. Brenna, yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the 4 Necessity Valve Turners? Because I think that it's quite a story.
Sure. So in early February of 2019, so almost a year and a half ago now, Michele Naar-Obed, who's on this call, and Daniel Yildirim and Allison Pullman and I, the 4 of us, after months of praying and discernment and planning, we entered an Enbridge Energy emergency valve site with the intention of asking Enbridge to turn off the valve. And then if they did not do that, then we could manually turn it off ourselves. We told them that we were prepared to manually turn it off ourselves if they did not do it. And they did it themselves remotely within maybe about a half an hour. And we brought with us, and I think Michele will talk a lot more about the spiritual and prayerful intentions behind our action. We brought with us sacred objects that were infused with prayers from people from all over the country who had not known specifically what their prayers would go for other than to stop the expansion of the Enbridge Line 3 project in the Duluth area in Minnesota. So that, yeah. And so we have been, the 4 of us were arrested after spending about an hour at the site. And we are currently awaiting trial. Our trial was supposed to have been a few weeks ago, but because of the COVID pandemic, our trial has been tentatively rescheduled for the end of August, and likely to be postponed even further because of the COVID pandemic.
So for you, Brenna, what brought you personally to that moment? I mean, how did you get to the point where you said, this is something that I feel like I need to do?
Sure. Well, there's a lot that goes into it, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. So I grew up Catholic, and I think my Catholic faith has everything to do with it. I grew up with a reverence of the created world. I grew up in Massachusetts, in Wampanoag territory near Plymouth, Massachusetts. So right near the ocean. So I grew up with my mom every time we passed the ocean saying, you know, there's proof that God exists right there. So we had a real reverence for, well, I guess you could, the water, because of the ocean, and that's where we saw God existing. And then fast forward to post-college life, I joined the Catholic worker movement that works for peace and justice. Most communities in the Catholic worker our urban houses of hospitality, working with and for those on the margins. I currently live in a Catholic worker community, which is, there are several of us, but we're a smaller group. I live on a farm, and one of the main goals of our farm is sustainable living. So we use only renewable energy on our farm, either solar, we cook and heat with wood. So we try to live sustainably in as well as we can while still being involved with at the outside world and work for justice. And then I'd say a few different things between the last 5 and 10 years happened that brought me to the point of doing an action like this. I read an article, or it was a chapter by a woman named Jennifer Harvey in a book called Buffalo Shout, Salmon Cry. And that was a book kind of done in collaboration with white descendants of settlers, Christians in Canada, as well as Indigenous thinkers, both Christian and not Christian. And Jennifer Harvey wrote an article that really pricked my conscience and got me thinking. She said, if Christians who are concerned about the environment and working for the land must take seriously, and if they don't take seriously, it's almost as good as not doing it at all, must take seriously the idea of reparations or return of land to the people whose land this originally was. So must take seriously land reparation to Indigenous communities. And I had never really heard of that idea before. And I was thinking, here I am, a Christian who's working on behalf of creation, trying to live sustainably. What does this even mean? Around that same time, maybe a year or two later, I got to go to a conference that Ched was one of the main organizers of in Minneapolis. And that was the first time I met Elaine, his wife, Elaine Enns. And her workshop, she led a workshop also there talking about our responsibility as descendants of settlers and immigrants, those of us who are not Native, to learn our own histories and as a way of healing our histories, learn our own histories and how they overlapped with Indigenous history of the land on which we lived, on the land that we called home. And also that same conference, I met and have since become friends with a man named Jim Baird Jacobs, who Ched and Elaine kind of introduced me to through that conference, who's a Mohican man working in Dakota territory. And he does tours of sacred sites in the Minneapolis area. I got to go on a tour that he led, he told us, he did a 4-hour tour, and most of that was the story of the genesis and genocide of the Dakota people that both took place at the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. And I live within 10 miles of the Mississippi River down here at the St. Isidore Catholic Worker Farm. The Mississippi River is a huge part of our life. It's a huge part of our existence. And here, where the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers come together, just a few hours drive north, I found out about this story that I had never known in my 40 years of life, about the Genesis. That's the sacred Genesis site of the Dakota people, and it's also the place where much of their genocide took place. So that was a real wake-up call for me. And since then, I've been trying to build relationship, or at the very least, lend support to Indigenous movements that are working for creation, rather than myself always being the one to take the initiative or to decide what it is in creation that I want to protect. I mean, of course, I continue to do that work, but especially when Indigenous movements are leading that work, I try to lend support in whatever way I can. And when Michele Obed, who's been a real mentor, or kind of, an elder in the Catholic worker movement. Sorry, I hope you don't mind me using that term, Michele.
I own it now.
She invited me and several others to join her in this. She had been, and I'll let her tell her own story, but she had been knowing of the movement, mostly both indigenous led and not, lots of non-indigenous allies who were working to stop line 3. And Michele said, what about this action? It's a completely nonviolent action. However, it does involve breaking into a site. And so it's a little bit riskier than just like stepping over a line and kind of getting a slap on the wrist, which is what I've been used to. I've done other acts of civil disobedience before in my time as a Catholic worker. I would say I leapt at the chance to do that.
Well, thank you for telling that story. I appreciate it. So,
Sure.
Michele, that I think that brings us to you.
I have a lot of friends from the Fond du Lac reservation here, and we've been friends long before the whole kind of water protection and Standing Rock had become much more upfront in our site. And so during our friendship, during that time, Standing Rock did occur, and I was in the Middle East when that happened, and I missed a lot of what was developing, what was building, what people described as this incredible community that was built around this black snake that was a threat to them. But it wasn't just a political movement. It wasn't even like an environmental movement. It was the beloved community that was being built. And it was the way people spoke about it was just, this was what, like we have talked about in the Catholic worker movement. I cut my teeth at Jonah House, which was a faith-based community that did a lot of demonstrations and very high-risk actions called plowshare actions against nuclear weapons. And so we often spoke about the beloved community, and we saw the example in Isaiah where they all shall stream up God's holy mountain. But before that, people will disarm. They will turn their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, and nations shall not wage war against nation nor study war anymore. And so this beautiful vision that Isaiah had was kind of in my mind. This is a faith-based journey for me, and what does that mean? I grew up a Catholic, so I have a lot of those. The sacraments were a very big part of my growing up, and the social justice teachings were, as some people have said, our best kept secret. And it wasn't really until I moved into Jonah House that I began to see that the social justice teachings and the disciples and the communities that they lived in and how they lived were very much happening right here now in our time. And I was just another link in that long chain, that long tradition, and I wanted to be a good link. And that's what I figure I will pass that link on as my life enters whatever next stage. To go back a little bit before the action, we had the line 3 was coming at us. We had a lot of legislative and political hearings that were going on down in St. Paul, and some of my friends from Fond du Lac were dragging me down to them and to stand with them, because for especially at that point for them, that pipeline was going right through Fond du Lac, and some of the other nations had rejected it completely, and Fond du Lac was really put in a very position where they had to make a decision and how they were going to accept it. And the way they described it is we had to decide whether we wanted to be killed with the bullet or with the sword. They felt like that's what they were up against. That last day, I will never forget it. I was standing next to a friend of mine from Fond du Lac, and they had made the decision to give them the certificate of need. The next step was to decide what route it was going to give them. And there were, like I said, there were many routes, but this one particular one they were pushing for, and that was going through Fond du Lac. And my friend said to me, there was a map and up on the wall, and my friend said to me, what is this looking like? And I said, it's looking like it's not good. It's gonna go, it's good, they're gonna get it through, and they're gonna get it through this particular route. And she said, stop talking. And she was crying. And I said, why? And she said, I don't want the ancestors to hear this. And I said, I'm so sorry. And I stopped talking. That's how deep this goes. And that is a level that my Catholic faith never taught me, never gave me that depth of understanding what it meant to be connected to a spiritual world and where that spiritual world exists. At best, for Catholicism, we're taught that this hierarchical structure that, man is on the top, and at best, we're responsible to treat and protect our resources. They're still resources. They're not our brothers and our sisters. They're not our relatives. And at worst, everything is commodified and exploited. That's at worst in our Christian traditions. So that level of that depth that I heard at that moment was it went like right through me. What we are facing, what we continue to face, is something that is so deep and so intense that to think that we little human beings can really do this without the intervention of something much deeper and bigger than ourselves is a bit arrogant, I feel. And so it seems to me that all of the faith traditions can come together. We all have a piece of this truth, and that if we can all come together and understand the best of our own, and then work and how to work them together, that we might actually be able to have a shot. And so at addressing this. And so, like, one of the things that I think about is, like, the house that I live in, the Kildegard House Catholic Worker, it was blessed by two religious or faith-based people. One was from an Anishinaabe elder, and the other was a Benedictine sister. And I see them, I see the spirits, their ancestors, working together in a different realm. And if they can work together on a different realm, we surely can work together on this realm. That's kind of how I see it. We weren't the first action. We weren't the first valve turning action to come around. There were two before us. One, Indigenous women up in Canada, and First Nations women that did the first valve turning action. I can't remember the date, maybe 2012 or 2013, I'm not sure. And then there were five people that came together and shut down the valves in 4 different states, and they did it simultaneously. And that was kind of like, I had those examples in my mind, and I thought, can we do this? And we did a lot of dialogue with our friends from Fond du Lac about how best to do this, and do we do this under there's all this stuff about whose leadership are we doing this under? Are we doing it under their support, their leadership, our leadership? They were like, it's your action. You figure out what you want to do, and we'll support you. and basically that's how that ended up, and it really worked out for the best. So we even thought about, should we go to one of these block valves? These block valves are every, I don't know, 10 miles or so along the pipeline, and and there was one right in Fond du Lac that we looked at, and we thought, you know, at one point we talked with them a lot about doing it on Fond du Lac, and then we all decided it was best to not do it on Fond du Lac, to go outside of Fond du Lac, and to go to a different block valve. And so we did that. The most amazing thing to me was that in my mind, I knew that this was just a very temporary thing. We could shut this down. Either we would be able to shut it down manually, which it turns out we couldn't even do that. Well, we didn't have the right tool. We had every tool that one could imagine for turning off a block valve, except for a small Allen wrench. We did not have the small Allen wrench that would have turned the set screw, that would have allowed us to get a vice grip on the stem of the wheel and turn it. And so we kept trying to look for alternatives to the Allen wrench. And at one point we tried using a crucifix. And I thought this could be a real insult, or it could be a real, either Jesus is feeling really insulted by this, or he's feeling really needed and important that we had taken this crucifix and tried to get it in there and turn that set screw. Well, it didn't really work, but we kept speaking. We were live streaming it the whole time, and we kept speaking about the ancestors that were with us, and we invoked them in both song and in prayer. And we spoke about the sacred objects that we had brought back to this site now and hung them up all over the place. And as we were invoking the ancestors and the spirits and the saints, and talking about these sacred objects, the thing began to turn. And it was I don't know, to me that was just like, I could just see them all there, and I was just so moved by that. And from there we broke into song, Zachariah's Canticle, the turning of the world. And it still kind of makes me cry when I think about that, because it was pleasing. I felt like what we were doing was pleasing to God and pleasing to the ancestors and to the saints, and we were so grateful for them to be part of that. And so there's not really any action that I do anymore that doesn't come out of some kind of faith perspective. We had no idea that we had no real hope. I had no real hope that it was going to stay turned off. We said this was a timeout. We were offering our politicians, we were offering the Enbridge company, we were offering the world, the earth, a timeout, so that we could now look at how can we permanently turn this thing off? How can we permanently get away from exploitation and commodification of everything in our world for the benefit of a few? How can we turn that off for good?
Well, thank you, Michele, so much for sharing that. And really, Brenna and Chet, all of you, for sharing your stories. I think it's those personal stories that really make a difference in witnessing to other people of a journey to caring for our creation, to caring for the land and the water around us. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for speaking with me and with the Great Lakes Spirituality Project today. Our time is up, but I am very grateful for that. So thank you, and take care.
Thanks. Could I put in one quick plug? Thinking of Great Lakes Spirituality, there is a wonderful movement happening, and if you go to the website spiritofthewater.org, spiritofthewater.org, there's a movement led by Mary Ellen Baker, who's an Ojibwe elder, but also lots of Native and non-Native friends who are trying to gather 5,000 women to pray for the water. And this will be the 4th year that they're doing it. And this year they'll do it mostly online because of the COVID crisis. but it's August 2nd through 6th, and people can find out more information about how to pray. Both women and men can pray, but in the Ojibwe tradition, women and water have a spiritual connection. So it's women and water coming together, but it's spiritofthewater.org, and I encourage anybody listening. It happens in the Lakota Reservation, so it's in the Great Lakes region, and any of your listeners who might be interested, that would be wonderful.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I'll be sure to check that out. All right. Well, take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.